Yo, what's going on, guys? It's Char here, back with another episode of Charred Takes. Now, I'm going to do a couple of disclaimers here at the beginning of the video talking about the channel and me. If you guys are only interested in the topic, there's always the chapters right below the video. You can go ahead and skip to where we get talking about the discussion proper. Thanks. So I just wanted to say from the bottom of my heart, thank you all the people who responded to maybe some of the stuff I was saying in the what's it called, the Marvel Rewind videos or the community post. Been going through a bit of health struggles recently, but I am glad to say that it has been improving, and I'm excited to be bringing more videos to you guys more often. Right now, I was just kind of on the back burner. One Marvel Rewind a week was enough for me. I couldn't really find the time or energy to create another video for the week, but hopefully we'll get back to almost these weekly, semi-weekly discussion topics. On another note, speaking of Charred Takes, the last Charred Take went nuclear when we were talking about the 5 years review article from Fantasy Flight Games. Thank you guys so much for the support on that. There was so much discussion, a ton of great comments in the comment section. I really loved the amount of discussion that video had. And that's the whole point of this series, just to get us talking about topics in and around the Marvel Champion space. That was really cool, and hopefully we can keep that going. Obviously, maybe not to the same extent. But okay, let's get into the discussion proper here. So this one was sort of sparked by this new series being started on the Winning Hand channel. If you guys haven't checked them out, they do a great podcast to talk about Marvel Champions one card at a time. But they had another new series where they go over less seen decks and deck builders, along with one of my good friends in the community, Andy R. It's such a great series. They're able to go over so many cool and fun and unique decks from decks that maybe haven't got as much love as they should have. But that's what this episode is sort of inspired by today, specifically when they were talking about how you go about making a deck, how a player goes about playing the game, and how it affects kind of the choices and opinions that they make on one deck versus the other. And we're going to get more into that later into the video. As always, it's a Charred Take, so the opinions are completely my own here, and I encourage other opinions and discussion in the comment section below. Really, it's a ton of fun. I'm not lying when I say that. I love hearing what you guys have to say. I love responding back, having a bit of a dialogue going so we can all come to a better understanding. Let me know if my take is cooked or if it was charred. I'm sorry, if my take was cooking or if it was charred, aka in the oven for a bit too long. I will say for today's episode specifically, there's not much of a Charred Take, I'll be honest. It's just, there's not really like a general thesis or a point I'm trying to make. I'm just kind of giving a background on my own play style, my own deck building style, and how that, culminates into the gameplay and the decks that I play in this game. We're going to give the thesis anyway, so what I'm going to try and kind of convince you of today, well, not really convince, I'm more just going to explain my background, but I'm going to frame it in the way of convincing. The thesis is Marvel Champions is best enjoyed in a Johnny Spike mode of playing, and you will understand what I mean by that in a bit if you have not checked out the Winning Hands new series where they explained it in their first episode. But all right, let's go ahead and get into that context on what the heck I'm talking about with this Johnny Spike mode of playing. So for our first section here, we're going to talk about the styles of play when it comes to card games, and these were directly adapted from Magic the Gathering to Marvel Champions. Boom Guy and Andy R do a really great job of explaining this in their first episode, which again, for the third time, I'll probably have it linked down below for you to check that out. But there's three main ways of expressing someone's play with kind of subcategories that go into these three main categories. That was kind of coined by one of the Magic designers in the early 2000s and then kind of updated throughout the years. The first one is called the Timmy. Now, when we're talking about a Timmy, they sort of come into card games or deck building with one main thing in mind. They just want a really fun experience. They want a really cool experience, and that's the only thing that matters to them. They're there for a big, flashy play. They come in for that one specific purpose or that one card that they want to play, and that's what they find enjoyment in when they play the game. So the biggest example I guess I could have of that is like someone loading into a multiplayer game. It doesn't matter. They're loading in with Hulk, and they're going to Hulk smash the villain every turn if they can. And if they don't, they're going to do like one big thwarting. They really come in for that one big feeling of doing something, doing something that they find personally cool. And that's where they enjoy the game. Sorry if the explanations aren't super great. Again, check that video link down below. They explain it probably a bit better than I can. The second major category is the Johnny. So how the Johnny differentiates from the Timmy is they're kind of in it for like the big combos. They're in it for new and interesting deck synergies, and they like to express themselves not by one specific thing they come into a game to do, by expressing themselves from being clever, from being creative, from being offbeat, or on theme with the decks they make. So examples of how this can manifest, let's say you go through like a really novel idea, like, oh, I want to run like the Web Warriors with Wasp, and there's some interesting synergy there with the Web of Life and Destiny and some of Wasp cards. Just an example. I don't know if that actually exists, but it's like you're kind of, mishmatching two different themes, and you're finding a really interesting and creative synergy. Now, is Wasp with the Web Warriors the best card so you could be putting in her deck? Probably not, but is it cool? Is it interesting? And can it also be powerful? Yes, and that is what the Johnnies strive for. Another way is just like making super on-theme decks is another way a Johnny can kind of express themselves. Having on-theme decks versus a thematic matchup is just a really fun way to express themselves. And, really interesting combo decks, or finding out new strategies and synergies that they're not really attuned to, or something that hasn't been explored a lot by the community at large. And again, the game isn't competitive. That's why these, categories get kind of blurry, but they're not super worried about how efficient or how good the specific cards in their deck are, as long as those cards serve the purpose of the greater vision they have for the theme, the combo, the cleverness, the creativity, etc. Now we get to I'd say the opposite end of the spectrum, even though I think it's a kind of not an incorrect way of looking at it, but it might be a shorthand that'll get you confused, is the spike player. Now, spike players are all about the power, they're all about the efficiency, and they go into the games wanting to win. They will do whatever it takes to win, which is something that is often said about spike players. They find joy in the numbers. They find joy in the optimal efficiency, the optimal numbers to run. They're worried about the card efficiency, like cost per damage ratio or cost per threat ratio, and they solely make decks with only those things in mind. If they're going into a scenario, it doesn't matter if it's absorbing man on standard or expert Ronin on heroic mode, they are going in with the most optimal cards because that's what they find fun. They look at the math, they're like, this card is super good in this scenario, it's really optimal to play, and I want to see kind of not necessarily how fast I can beat the villain, but how badly I can beat the villain. They show their sense of joy from the game comes from like kind of outsmarting the game and beating down the villains with just raw efficiency, raw number, and the strength of what is the strongest deck I can build and execute to take on this challenge. Like I said, you can kind of think of these categories as going from less experienced serious to more experienced, but I don't think that's necessarily true. How I view it is just different ways people enjoy the game. I feel like you can have a ton of experience in this game. You can be a spike player really early on. You beat all the villains. You beat them all in expert. You do it with, deck building restrictions and whatnot. I feel like you can do all of that. You can be like a really hardcore spike player, and I think eventually at a point you can evolve into a Johnny. You're like, I've done everything I need to do to express my skill. I want to make really cool and interesting fun decks that can still beat these villains. I think that's more of a Johnny type thing to do. Or maybe you've done everything you wanted to do and you're like, I just want to sit down at a table some days or most days when I play and just Hulk smash the villain a couple times in multiplayer. Very Timmy-like. So we're going to move on to the second category here and talking about kind of how my playstyle sort of evolved. As my thesis stated, I was a Johnny Spike mode of playing, and I'm trying to convince you or just give some context on why I think that's the best. Okay, so we're going to move on to the second category here, which is talking about my prior TCG experience. Now, why this matters, it's sort of like the culmination of why I'm advocating for this Johnny Spike method of playing. Hopefully it gives a bit of insight into how I made the playstyle I currently have today. Most of my prior competitive TCG experience is from the One Piece card game. When I was playing that game, especially in the first year of the game being out, there was a lot of meta games where there was obviously very clear, stronger strategies than the rest of the game. There was just, in that game, you choose leaders and you make a deck based on the color. There was obviously, in every meta that I played, there was a top 1 to 3 leaders you should be playing, and everything outside of that, I wouldn't call it trolling, but it was kind of like, you were putting yourself at a disadvantage because there was obviously a deck you should be playing at any given time. So when I would play in that game and when I would make decks and when I would go to locals, I never found myself getting excited to ever play the strongest decks in the game. I wasn't really worried about putting the absolute best cards in my deck to get the best, chance at winning. what really got me excited was playing a deck on the fringe of the meta, something that was really close to being good enough, or as you know, TCG communities might call it, like rogue decks. I like trying to find certain decks or certain deck synergies that could combat the meta instead of being part of the meta directly. And then we get into a bigger discussion on metagames where anti-meta strategies and rogue decks are part of an overall metagame. But for the point I'm trying to make is that I would make decks that would look at the top 1 to 3 most powerful strategies and try and find a way to undercut them where they had weaknesses. Even though some of these decks were extremely strong and their weaknesses were really far and wide between, I still would try my best and play strategies I thought were fun and could kind of hit them where it hurt, so to say. In some of those earlier metagames, a lot of the metagames are, centralized around these strong couple strategies, so it was really possible to operate in a way like that, which I found a ton of fun. I don't like playing the mirrors in card games, so that could also be another reason why I never played the strongest meta leaders and why I kind of sort of went to the side of the Johnny more so than the Spike, because I don't like playing mirrors against somebody else. It just, not that it's not skillful, it definitely is skillful. I just like playing a different leader than my opponent. So if we're moving on to the third category here, let's talk about how this applies to Marvel Champions, how all of this TCG prior TCG Experience applies. So I think when I was first starting off with Marvel Champions, I had a very Timmy-like approach to the game, and I think that happens to a lot of people who start card games, especially if they're not super familiar with the new card game. Anytime I was playing a hero, or I sat down to play a villain or a hero the first couple of times, I would read through what card I thought was the coolest in their kit. I'm like, okay, my goal is I want to do this one thing in the game. Whether I won or lost while I was learning the hero, that is, I just want to get this off. So the easiest example of this was the She-Hulk Gamma Slam in the core set. It was just when I was playing through the core set, the She-Hulk Gamma Slam was just like the most fun thing I could ever imagine. I was like, oh my goodness, I can do 15 damage on one card. That's absolutely crazy. And if I got to do that, even if I meant I died the next villain phase, that was good enough for me. And I'd pick the cards up, shuffle them up, and go again and see if I could actually beat it this time. But after I was starting to get familiar with the heroes and villains to an extent, I started net decking, and that kind of has a negative connotation in TCG communities, but for Marvel Champions specifically, I think it's a fine idea to, one, learn how to deck build, and two, just get some powerful decks that you can actually play and beat some of these villains you might be struggling with. So of course I hopped on Marvel CDB and I looked at some decks, stronger decks to fight some of the stronger villains, or when I was doing kind of the beginning of tipping my toes into expert. This experience I found, however, kind of bored me when this net decking and finding a really strong deck to take on a really strong villain kind of bored me, specifically because I wouldn't put the deck strength I felt wasn't corresponding to the villain strength. So I'd do like a really strong leadership Captain America deck and I'd take on like Absorbing Man on expert. I just thought that wasn't a fair challenge at all. And it got kind of boring for me when I would play through these villains. This obviously I found very quickly was not an area I had fun operating in. For an example, I tried to play a couple of I tried to play every hero before the mutant waves before I got into the mutants proper, but as soon as I got into the mutants proper, I'm like, okay, I want to sit down, I want to play Cyclops because he's my favorite X-Men character. I want to play Cyclops and I want to look at a really strong deck for him and I want to try taking on a really strong villain. So I did that and it kind of skewed my opinion. I'm like, wow, this is so much power. The amount of allies he was able to put on the board, the amount of tactic upgrades, the amount of upgrades he could put on his allies. I was like, whoa, this is a whole new level of power that I never experienced in this game. And it kind of bored me out because like some of these villains I had, kind of struggles with in the past, I would revisit with this Cyclops deck and I'm like, whoa, this is like a insane power jump. And it's not hard to deal with these guys at all anymore, which is kind of disappointing in a way. So I think a couple of those experiences, starting with my beginning to going into Marvel CDB and finding some strong decks, really did shape my current playstyle. Like I said, in the comment section of that first video by Boom Guy and Andy R, along with at the beginning of this video, I identify myself as primarily a Johnny player with a Spike player that's constantly at its heels. So when I build a deck for a hero or I pick out a hero, the theming and thematics are really fun for me and important to me. When I sit down against a Guardian villain, I almost always want to play a Guardian hero against them. Matching the hero for a thematic matchup with a thematic deck makes the experience super fun for me. If I'm not feeling a thematic matchup, how that Johnny side kind of comes out in my deck building is that I'll think of a novel idea or synergy, something that I think like there's no way this works, or something that's really cool, and and I'll try and create that, or I'll find a deck on Marvel CDB that's a similar thing where it's, you know, it's just really built around this one cool idea or concept and seeing if it really can push it to its limit. An example of that was the 4-player game I played with Daring Lime a couple of days back, where I played the Spider-Woman pool leadership deck that revolved around the Teenage Warhead ally. That was a super fun, super obvious Johnny deck that it was just a joy for me to play on the channel. And I think that was just the biggest, you know, kind of the biggest example of my playstyle. That being said, I will do a couple caveats here that even when I picked up that Spider-Woman deck, I still, when I say I have the Spike player constantly at my heels, if I think the deck goes too far into the Johnny category, or when I say Johnny category, if it goes too far into not being optimal or not being able to help out the board or help me out in solo, I do put a couple of Spike cards in there to kind of even out that power balance. So for example, when I was playing in that 4-player game, the deck did not have Helicarrier Maria Hill, and when I'm playing multiplayer, those are like auto includes for me, so I obviously just added them in. And because Spider-Woman has aspect building restrictions, I had to add another pool card in, which was Cut Upper in this case. I thought all 3 of those cards were really fun and cool for multiplayer specifically, so I added them in for power. That's that Spike thing coming out of me where it's like, okay, I do like these fun strategies, but I need to put these kind of stronger cards in depending on the player count and scenario we're playing. So let's go ahead and talk about how this applies to the channel at large, how my playstyle affects the channel, the videos I upload, the challenges I do, the series I create, etc. So if you don't believe me on my own self-identification of Johnny and Spike, I think there is no better example than my series Marvel Rewind. If you guys haven't checked that out, it's when I'm going through every single villain in the game in chronological order, trying my best to use only the cards available at that time to defeat the villains on expert mode. It's a ton of fun. Shameless self-plug. Go check it out. There's a whole playlist on my channel. Regardless, at its core, Marvel Rewind is a Johnny series. The whole idea is me tasking myself. I'm giving myself a thematic matchup. That's my biggest goal for every episode, a thematic matchup. But also, I'm making the decks for each episode, and I'm trying to find new and novel ways to kind of represent these heroes' strengths, kind of get and tug at the villain's weaknesses, and just have really fun decks that with a limited card pool, which I think is another Johnny trait, because if I was completely Spike, after I played if it was a Spike series, after I played a hero, I would unlock their hero pack permanently, but I'm not doing that. I'm still trying my best to keep the card pool as limited as possible. So we have a thematic matchup, limited deck building restrictions, and trying to find new and unique synergies. I think that is 100% a Johnny's series at its core. You know, the series is focused on fighting villains on an even playing field, which is just a core Johnny trait, as I said. Like I was talking to Boom Guy in a comment of one of the most recent Marvel Rewind videos, and the biggest considerations for me picking a hero are the theme, which is a Johnny trait, and second off is the strength of the hero compared to the weaknesses of the villain. I want to give the hero a good showing when I showcase them on the series, because I think it'll get people more excited to sit down and go into their collection, pick up an old hero they haven't played in a while, and try them out again, see what new and unique synergies they can find, what fun they can have in an old hero, and breathe some new life into them, whether in a limited card pool or with the current card pool we have today. I will say again, that Spike caveat in Marvel Rewind is when I get to some of these harder villains, and I'm talking namely, you know, Ronan, Venom, Goblin, and some of the harder ones, the Johnny type of deck building is going to move to the wayside a little bit for pure power cards. When I get into Ronan, that is going to be a power card deck. The deck is going to be efficient. There's not going to be any fluff. I'm probably going to use more packs than I normally do just to make sure, like, okay, this is a hard villain. I need like a Spike deck. I need to change my methodology to make sure that I have fun during the recordings and I'm able to get a successful recording to deliver to you guys. So what I will say is when Marvel Rewind comes to an end, which seems like such a long time from now, after the end of the series, after doing so many thematic matchups, what it will do for me specifically is it'll almost unshackle that kind of tugging that I pull, that it will kind of release me from the shackles of having to play thematic matchups for every single villain encounter, because that's something I still love doing, and not that I feel obligated to do, but I really like doing. If it's a Guardian villain, I do a Guardian hero. If it's an Avenger villain, I do an Avenger hero. And it's kind of hard for me to build decks or heroes to go against scenarios outside of that theming, but Marvel Rewind specifically is kind of scratching that itch for me of like, okay, I'm doing every villain with a limited card pool in a thematic matchup. So now it'll change from just purely thematic matchups with novel decks to novel heroes and novel decks against villains. The path of the Johnny never ends is how I want to end this. But even throughout the series, oh, and this is what I was talking about a bit earlier. We're talking about the spike constantly at the heels. Throughout most of my deck lists in the series, most of the Johnny decks don't go off the deep end too far. You know, that's kind of comes from the competitive TCG background and me wanting to play good cards in my deck generally, but I find myself rarely putting bad cards in my decks, even if I want to do a funny synergy. And the example I have for this is, I don't think I've ever used the core set card Emergency in a single deck, and I don't think you could ever expect me to use that even one time. Even if a hero had a really cool unseen synergy with it, it had to be like really, it had to meet like a certain power threshold for me to put a card which I frankly think is bad into a deck like that. Emergency, I'm sorry, this is not the channel for you. So how are we going to end this? So let's go ahead and speak on the thesis one more time. So I'll go ahead and reiterate. Marvel Champions is best enjoyed in a Johnny Spike mode of playing, which is the mode of playing that I operate in. Whether we're talking solo, 2, 3-player, or 4, sitting down at a table with a thematic matchup and / or a novel deck is the most fun you can have in this game. And I will, you know, put parentheses around this to me specifically. In multiplayer specifically, I find that the spike part of me comes out a bit more because I don't want to feel like I'm dragging down the table by going full Timmy or full, you know, only focus on my Johnny strategy on them. That's why I choose to run power cards like Maria Hill, like Helicarrier, so that everyone at the table can have fun with whatever mode they like operating in and exceed in the same way. Now, I'm not saying that all my teammates need to have the same consideration that I do. If someone wants to load into a multiplayer game with a Timmy kind of attitude and deck building, go for it. I'm just gonna go ahead and enable you to do that better, which is why I put those kind of spike power cards into the deck. Of course, at the end of the day, this is all my opinion. I just wanted to share my thoughts on the Timmy, Spike, and Johnny discussion that was going on a bit ago and hopefully can continue going on with the release of this video. And open the floor for discussion below about how you guys enjoy playing Marvel Champions. Where do you really find yourself sitting in this kind of Timmy, Johnny, Spike discussion? What type of decks and what kind of playstyles do you like creating or playing when you're sitting down to play Marvel Champions? Does it differ from solo to multiplayer, or do you only play multiplayer? Just let me know down in the comments below, and let me know if I was cooking on my take. If you're a Johnny Spike player, I'm sure you will agree, or if it's Charred, you're like, no, I'm a huge Timmy player. I love going down and sitting and doing this one thing, and that's how I operate. More power to you. That's why this game's great. We have different ways of playing, different ways of deck building, and I'm excited to hear all the discussion in the comment sections down below. That's going to be it for today's video. Thank you guys so much for the well wishes on my recovery from my health issues. Thank you guys so much for checking out Charred Takes and Marvel Rewind. I appreciate the support so much, and there's going to be some cool stuff coming at the end of the year into the new year, so make sure to stay tuned for that. Thank you guys so much for watching. Leave a like down below and subscribe if you haven't already. I'll see you guys in the next one. Goodbye.